And it's nice to hear that Jewel song again. In the end, only kindness matters. Wow, I'm really, I'm electric. I'm really pleased to see so many of you. I really, it's Labor Day weekend. You do know that, right? So I thought, I might be talking to myself today. So I'm kind of glad to see that I'm not. Hey, this is wonderful. This is great. And if you're with us for the first time, woohoo! I will give you a special welcome later, but I'm really glad you're here this morning. We are now in the month of September, so the theme has shifted a little bit to ensuring the stewardship of our planet. And today I'm going to begin with the within, actually, because the quality also this month is love. So we're starting with the recognition that it only takes a spark to start something. Now, those of us that live in fire country, we're really well aware of that. But it also is true with us on the inside. What is it that sets off that spark that begins, that first thing, the first idea, the first seed, the first glimmer? Those things, we don't make them, and yet they show up for us, within us, or they come to us in various ways. And when they do that, sometimes the process of that sparking and actually igniting can be a bit challenging or difficult for us. And sometimes in the midst of that challenge or difficulty, it's hard to see to the other side, to recognize that this is actually, this challenge, this obstacle, this difficulty, is actually a catalyst to help that thing, that the obstacle itself serves a purpose in preparing us to catch fire, to ignite in a particular way. So here's an example of how a difficulty can do something a little better. This 18-year-old had been away at college for about 1 10-week term when her parents got this letter from her at home. Dear Mom and Dad, I'm sorry I haven't written yet lately, but my things were all destroyed in the dorm fire. My eyes are almost completely healed now, and the doctor assures me there'll be no permanent damage from the smoke. While the dorm is being rebuilt, I've moved in with my boyfriend. I think you met Roy when you were here on Parents' Weekend. I know how much you've always wanted grandchildren. You'll be happy to know I'm expecting a baby the end of next summer. Please excuse this exercise in English composition. There was no dorm fire. My eyes are not damaged, I'm not living with my boyfriend, and I'm not pregnant. However, I did receive a D in English literature and an F in French, so I wanted to be sure you got this information in its proper perspective. Love, Sarah. Sometimes putting something into context allows us to understand that the challenge we're facing may not be as huge an obstacle as we thought it was at first glance, that in fact is more manageable than we thought. So sometimes the turnaround is a thing that allows us to see that there is a gift happening here in the midst of the difficulty or challenge. So I wanted to, since I started with a spark, I wanted to use the metaphor of building a fire from scratch. So if you want to build a fire from scratch, you're going to need wood, and then you're going to need to create some kind of friction, some kind of resistance with that wood, and tinder that can catch the spark to get started. You need all those things. So when we look at that in the context of our lives, we might say that the initial piece of useful information, the idea, the inspiration that comes to us, almost anytime we have a real inspiration, it then meets some kind of a challenge, some kind of an obstacle. And we can get stuck right there. We can choose to get stuck right there when the obstacle or the challenge arises and not go forward any further. So what would be the tinder, or one possibility for tinder, that might let us get through that particular challenge or difficulty? Well, it might be a role model. Maybe we see somebody else whose action encourages us just enough or gives us just enough of an idea of how this might work or how to persist that we go forward with it and we get through the challenge. If we are a person of passion, maybe there's been an experience where we have failed in that passion in the past, and that causes us to, the next time the passion arises, to be afraid that maybe we ought to tamp that down. And what can be the tinder that might allow us then to engage with that passion in spite of our past? Well, maybe it is an invitation, or if you would, a kind of seduction that allows us to enter into an irresistible flow that takes us forward. If we have vision, we might think that the vision is so large that we become afraid of what the implications are if we do it. You know, I wonder when Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. was standing up to do his I Have a Dream speech at the March on Washington, and there were tens of thousands of people. If he was at all afraid of what that speech might produce, and yet what kept him going was the possibilities. Those possibilities sparked something in him so that his vision could be carried forward in spite of any concerns or fears that he might have. And he even names them in the speech, because he says, when he talks about being at the mountaintop, and he says, I may not get there with you. He's already had death threats. And indeed, he doesn't make it very much further. But the vision gets out there. He doesn't let the fear stop him, because the possibilities are such a tinder for him that the spark is irresistible to go with. Does this make sense? Our founder, Ernest Holmes, says in The Science of Mind, in an intelligent study of the teachings of the science of mind, we come to understand that all is love, yet all is law. Love is the divine givingness. Law is the way. Love is spontaneous. Law is impersonal. We should study the nature of reality with this in mind, and in this way we shall avoid two grave mistakes: either viewing life as made up only of mechanical laws, or viewing it as made up only of spontaneous actions, irrespective of law and order. So the vision, the inspiration, the passion, that beginning is the love, the spontaneous expression that insists on its expression through us in our experience. And then the law is that tinder and spark that comes out of it, that when we move through the obstacle, the law takes it and goes with it. And so it is almost necessary for us to experience the obstacle in order to have the energy and the persistence and the irresistible drive to go forward with whatever it is that we're challenged for. Because whatever that gift is that is calling to us to bring it forward, that spark that wants to be born, that quality that wants to be deepened or expressed in us, it's usually bigger than we know how to do. It may be something that, looking at it at face value, we can't figure out why we would even want to do that. Or we actively try to avoid it. You know the story of Jonah and the whale? God sends him to be a messenger. He doesn't want to be a messenger, so he runs away. So he gets swallowed by a whale and spat up on the shore where he needs to be. He can't get away from the expression of the divine in him that is calling to him. So the metaphor is that he actually gets swallowed up by it. And it takes him, and the obstacle eats him up and dumps him out right where he needs to be to do what he needs to do. So when we see the obstacle, it sometimes looks insurmountable, right? I mean, almost always, if it's an obstacle to us, if we perceive it as a challenge or an obstacle or a fear, it is challenging enough to look overwhelming or too difficult to get through, too painful. And yet, I love this quote, if there aren't obstacles along the way, the path probably doesn't lead anywhere. If it's easy, that's great. But you know, Serena Williams said something about every time I failed, that's when I learned. I didn't learn from the successes, I learned from the failures. Well, I think that ultimately, although we wouldn't want to opt for failure or call it failure, it is a way of reframing an experience to recognize that what doesn't work is there to teach us something so that we can be better at what it is we're trying to do, so that we can learn what does work. And so use the friction, use the obstacle, use the challenge, use the fear. Rather than letting it be a red light that stops us, let the very existence of it use us to inspire us to figure out, all right, if there were a way to get over this or around this or under this or through this or to dissolve this, if there were a way, what might it be? And then let the imagination run wild. Because sometimes just in doing that, we loosen up our belief in the obstacle enough to find a way through or to become a vibration that attracts the idea or the support or the right way through. Does this make sense, what I'm saying? Yes? And so we want to be able to, rather than resisting the friction, play with it. See how we can dance with it. What is it here to reveal to me? What is it here to empower in me? What is it here to be a catalyst for? And so what we find is that even a beginning, as small as a spark, even a small beginning can create a powerful outcome once you have the spark. We have to have the spark in order to make that leap. And so Joseph Campbell says, the big question is whether you're going to be able to say a hearty yes to your adventure. And actually, I think the truth is that the universe will also accept kind of a meh, and if we give it a no, if we really don't understand and we give it a no, that doesn't necessarily mean the universe gives up on us. It usually sneaks around and tries to find different ways to invite us that are more enticing or irresistible. And sometimes it knocks us down absolutely flat. That can work. I'm a testament to that. Ernest Holmes says this: love alone can overcome fear, because love surrenders itself to the object of its adoration. The soul must make a complete surrender of itself to the Spirit. That is, the law must come under subjugation to the Spirit. The will of the Spirit is clear thinking, peace, and happiness. It could have no other will. And so even that small beginning can create a powerful outcome once we catch the spark, once we have the spark and we catch it. Diane Lane, who is an actress who's been through some interesting experiences, done a lot of really good work in the world, and also she was married to, oh gosh, I've forgotten his name now. Anyway, Brolin. She was Barbara Streisand's daughter-in-law for a while. But eventually that marriage failed. And so that was an experience that had to be gone through. And I don't know that she said it in exactly this context, in this experience in her life, but she said, blessings come in disguise and challenges can be a blessing. I think it's possible, if we stretch our belief system to a great degree, that we might imagine that every challenge is actually a blessing. And sometimes it requires a loss that requires some grieving in the process too. Holmes says this: the heart is the center of divine love and perfect circulation. Its action is harmonious, vital, adequate, and complete. The heart, its action is harmonious, vital, adequate, and complete. There is no false action and no wrong action. In other words, no matter what you did and what the outcome was, he's saying it wasn't a mistake. It's not a false action. It's not a wrong action. That energy is bringing you here or bringing you to the next place that you need to be. And he goes on to say, the pulsations of life are steady, unceasing, and perfect. Let not your heart be troubled. Love is at the center of our being, and the calm, continuous pulsations of life are governed by love. And so, love is what starts everything. Law is what makes it possible. But we have to have them both. We have to have the inspiration, and we have to have the way. We have to have both. In 1 John, I looked at a bunch of different translations of this because the key words can be so interesting in the way that different authors translate this. And partly it's because those languages that the scriptures were originally written in were not as linear as English. And so sometimes one word could mean a multitude of different things depending on the context or the feeling of what was being conveyed. And yet when we translate them into English, we have to choose a word. So in 1 John, it says, there is no fear in love, but love, perfect love, drives out fear because fear has to do with punishment. And the one who fears is not made perfect in love. Now, the word punishment is really interesting to me because it shows up in different translations as torment, pain, or suspicion. So listen to it this way. There is no fear in love, but perfect love drives out fear because fear has to do with torment, pain, suspicion, and punishment. The one who fears is not made perfect in love, or the one who fears is not grown up in love. In other words, love is not something we either have or we don't have. It's a becoming for us. It's a way of our spiritual growth revealing to us the truth that love is all there is, that God is all there is, and God is love, and therefore love is all there is. Real love doesn't need anything. It comes without conditions. It's complete in itself already. It's given freely from pure joy, even when the gift is in disguise. And I want to share a story with you about a gift in disguise. The story began in September 2006 when Jenny Stepion's father, Michael, was walking home from his job as head chef at a restaurant. Mr. Stepion, 53, was cutting through an alley when he was robbed at gunpoint by a 16-year-old who shot him in the head at close range. As her father lay dying in the hospital, Ms. Stepion said her family decided to accept the inevitable and donated his organs. Mr. Stepion's heart went to Arthur Thomas, a family of 4, who lives in Lawrenceville, New Jersey, and who, Ms. Stepion said, had been within days of dying. Given a diagnosis of ventricular tachycardia about 16 years before receiving the transplant, Mr. Thomas, 72, said that he was in congestive heart failure when word arrived that his doctors had found a heart. In order to get to the top of the transplant list, he said, you have to be really hurting. Once I had my transplant, of course, I decided I would write a thank you to the family. And from there, a relationship was forged. Through monthly phone calls, emails, and letters, Ms. Stepion's mother, Bernice, kept in touch with Mr. Thomas, even swapping Christmas cards and flowers on birthdays. At times, they compared parenting tips. But the families had not thought about meeting in person until Jenny, 33, became engaged in October. One of my first thoughts in that following week was, who will walk me down the aisle? Jenny said. I was thinking, oh my gosh, it would be so incredible to have my father there. And at her fiance's suggestion, Miss Stepien wrote Mr. Thomas, whom the family calls Tom, asking him to walk her down the aisle. Mr. Thomas said yes, but only after running the proposition by his own 30-year-old daughter, Jackie. She said, I think it's a wonderful idea. She also recommended he start practicing walking down the aisle. He said he practiced once before the wedding. Mr. Thomas, a retired college advisor who formerly worked at a boarding school in Lawrenceville, warned Jenny Stepien that his emotions might get the best of him. She told him she felt the same and said, I'll be right there with you. The wedding took place on Saturday in the church in Swissvale where Jenny Stepien's parents had been married. Mr. Thomas and the bride formally met one day earlier when he suggested that she grip his wrist where his pulse is strongest. I thought that would be the best way for her to feel close to her dad, Mr. Thomas said. That's her father's heart beating. At the church, the bride was photographed touching Mr. Thomas's chest. At the reception, they danced together, and guests mingled with Mr. Thomas and his wife, Nancy. The two families say they want to keep in touch and will plan to get together somewhere down the road, maybe an event with a little less pressure. I felt wonderful about bringing her dad's heart to Pittsburgh, Mr. Thomas said. If I had to, I would have walked. Surely, when Jenny's father died, that was not something that her family saw as a blessing in that moment. And giving of the organs was an act of generosity, even though they were allowed to know the families of the recipients. And to discover that this man, who was older than her dad, but a father of 4, his life had been saved. And then to have this celebration bringing the essence of her dad, his own physical heart, and this wonderful man whose life had been saved together in that place lets me know that not only was her dad there, but a part of him was there physically with them as well. And this became a blessing to everyone who attended the wedding. Not that the wedding wouldn't have been a blessing anyway, but this was especially a gift. And so I believe that sometimes the spark that we need shows up revealed through the midst of a challenge or an obstacle. Whatever you're looking at this week, whether it's large or small, I invite you to consider what it might be trying to give you, what it might be trying to reveal for you or train you toward or help you with, in spite of its status as something that's in the way. And so for all of us this morning, I'm just going to out myself on something. You know, I always sit here on Sunday morning with my coffee cup up here, my coffee mug, and I sip on that during the service. And right before the service began, in fact, as Rick was coming up to give the welcome, I knocked it over while it was open and poured it down my right cheek here. I'm still a little soggy. And so in that moment, I had to decide, is this going to wreck the morning? Am I going to look ridiculous? And then some part of this talk said to me, just mop it up, it'll be fine. If I can do that with anything that comes up in the next week or two, that'll be a real blessing. Namaste.